couple European nations saying reopening the Strait of Hormuz is critical at this time, and Iran once again firing a ballistic missile toward NATO territory. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pastor has the latest on the international impact of the Iran war.
We are working on a viable plan for the Straits of Hormuz, which I want to come back to.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer saying reopening the Strait of Hormuz is the single most effective way to bring down energy prices.
But it is our duty to protect British citizens, particularly their concern will be not just the escalation of the war, but this sense that it's going to hit them and their families and their households. And I think probably uppermost in their minds at the moment is energy bills.
The Chancellor of Germany also placing high importance on reopening Hormuz, suggesting Germany would assist a US plan to reopen the strait.
Germany will of course be ready to make its contribution to ensuring freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. We have already put forward extensive proposals on this matter. I would expressly suggest that we do so within the framework of an international contact group.
Also on Monday, Iran once again firing a ballistic missile toward NATO territory. A spokesperson for the Western Alliance saying NATO again successfully intercepted the missile heading to Turkey. The spokesperson added that NATO is prepared for such threats and will do what is necessary to defend its allies.
All flight plans that involved actions related to the operation in Iran were rejected, every single one of them, including those of refueling aircraft.
NTD's sister media, the Epoch Times, received a White House statement on the matter. The White House says the US is meeting all of its goals in Iran and does not need help from Spain or anyone else. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Energy shortages could hit Europe by next month. This is according to Shell's CEO. Joining us now to talk about the impact of the Iran war on Europe is Daniel Lacalle, chief economist at Tressis Hedge Fund, international financial analyst, and author of the book Freedom or Equality. Daniel, always good to see you. Hope you had a great weekend. So I just want to ask you, what has been the Iran war's impact, the main impact in Europe in terms of energy?
The biggest impact on the European economy comes from the increase in natural gas bills and power price bills. We have seen how European natural gas prices have soared by 55%, not reached the levels of 2022 yet, but unfortunately, this is happening in a period in which the European Union should be injecting for the winter season. No? So the impact is quite severe. You can see, for example, how the European Central Bank has almost doubled its inflation expectations for the Eurozone for 2026 and has slashed the economic growth expectations in a European Union that, as everybody knows, is not in a particular good shape in terms of growth. It was actually almost escaping recession in the latest projections. So the OECD, the ECB, and independent analysts all see the risk of stagnation with rising inflation and obviously hitting consumers in a very tough moment in which consumers are already burdened by the elevated levels of inflation that have been accumulated throughout the past 5 years.
So Daniel, you say Europeans are paying for higher energy prices. Can you compare those prices with what Americans are paying, and why is there a difference?
Yeah, every time I speak with my fellow Americans, I get very envious when they complain about gasoline prices. The average gasoline price in the United States is about $3.8 a gallon. In the European Union, the average is about $5.7 a gallon. But that's not even close to what you can see in many countries in which it can reach to $7.5, $8.5 a gallon, like Denmark, like other countries in the euro area. What is the big difference? The big difference is the enormity of taxes. We have a chain of taxes on hydrocarbons that are making the industry uncompetitive. Industries in Europe pay around 6 times what industries in the United States pay for natural gas and for gasoline. So what we are seeing, for example, is a very large chain of different taxes. At the level of the commodity, we have the CO2 tax. On top of that, we have the tariffs. And on top of that, we have the VAT and the hydrocarbon tax and the so-called green taxes on different elements. So all of those are stacked together, making almost 50%. Actually, in some cases, up to 60% of the price of gasoline paid in taxes and levies. So that is the big problem. The big problem is that what Europe did was to implement what Gavin Newsom wanted to implement in the United States, and Kamala Harris was announcing that was her policy in terms of energy, which was very large carbon taxes and hydrocarbon taxes, which basically make gasoline prices rise very fast when the commodity rises. And this is the key, because taxes are changed, and some are percentage of the price and others are per gallon or per liter. What happens is that when commodity prices rise, the gasoline prices that consumers pay go through the roof. But what's interesting is that when commodity prices fall, the gasoline price the consumer pays doesn't fall as rapidly, and certainly not as much. So it's a monster taxation machine. The energy sector in the European Union has been taxed to obliteration. And what we have seen, obviously, is stagnation, reduction in manufacturing, and loss of jobs.
So what I gather is that these taxes, the hydrocarbon tax, the CO2 tax, is part of Europe's green energy tax policies. That's what I gather here. So I saw a Reuters article today, and I found it very interesting. So it said that Germany's economy and energy minister said the EU's energy transition over the past 2 decades had produced higher systemic costs. So this is what the official said, that European policymakers are increasingly aware that some of these environmental measures are pushing up energy costs. So that's very interesting,
Absolutely.
Daniel. Is this the case right now, that some politicians are saying these things counter to the green energy policy?
Absolutely. We have seen for the first time in years how Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, said that the decommissioning of nuclear plants was a big mistake. We have also seen the energy minister in Germany saying that they may have to go back to increasing coal power generation in order to address the risk of supply, security of supply. All these things have proven that the so-called green policies have only made a very big dent on the industrial fabric of the European Union. And furthermore, they have not been green at all, because let's remember that the European Union continues to be the largest importer of Russian gas by pipe and also by liquefied natural gas. But we also have seen how Germany still uses 22% of its energy mix in coal. So it's not been very CO2 beneficial, because the only way in which the European Union has actually reduced CO2 emission has been by destroying the industry. So as the official said in Germany, and we are hearing more and more voices from Meloni to other officials in the European Union, these wrongly called green policies were basically massive taxation policies that ended obliterating industry and have created a very weak productive and manufacturing economy. And it's a dreadful, dreadful position. So I think that what at least is good is that what we see is that a few of these officials are starting to turn and are starting to show that, for example, the CO2 tax makes no sense. The European Union is 9% of global CO2 emissions, and 100% of the cost makes absolutely no sense. And again, I come to the point, it's only driven manufacturing and industry away from the European Union, destroyed jobs, created economic stagnation, and driven power prices to levels that Americans would not even think about. I mean, an average household in Europe pays up to 6 times more for electricity and natural gas than in the United States. And the average is twice and 3 times as much electricity and natural gas.
So, Daniel, I bring up this topic of conversation about green energy policies. I bring it up because do you think the Iran war and the disruption to fossil fuels can be viewed as sort of a test of how renewables work or how well they don't work when it comes to energy security? Because if it works well, you would think that the energy disruption to fossil fuels would have no impact.
Absolutely. This is what makes no sense, is that everybody is saying that the European Union made a wonderful bet on renewables, and at the same time, we're seeing that it's the most negatively impacted, both in inflation and in growth from the changing commodity prices. Why? Because renewables are volatile and intermittent, which makes you more dependent on natural gas, and as we have seen in Germany, coal, in periods in which you have to fulfill security of supply and peak demand. So the alleged success of having a lot of renewables, which are perfectly acceptable, there's nothing bad about renewables, is the problem is the ideologization of energy that we have seen in the European Union. Is that what we need to understand is that energy policy must comply with the principles of competitiveness, affordability, and security of supply. And the European Union has forgotten the 3 of them. So renewables are great, but they're only great if you have enough nuclear, enough hydro, enough natural gas, and enough oil in order to guarantee the security of supply required for transport, for energy, primary energy, and also for, obviously, for electricity generation. All these things are very important. Obviously, as you very well said, if those elements of policy would have been successful, today what we would be seeing is that the European Union would be facing lower inflation and higher growth than the United States. And it's the opposite. And what's really important, and the lesson here, is that for global energy needs and for security of supply, energy policy must count with every technology, and that eliminating technologies is a luxury that only bureaucrats can afford.
Okay, Daniel, just one final question here. Do you think the European Union, European countries have reached a point now, more than ever, that they have to make a choice between climate agenda policies and energy security?
I think that they don't have to choose, because what we know so far is that the so-called green energy policies were not green. That is the key thing. The key thing to understand here is that if you really want to be green and to care about the environment, what you need to do is to bet on technology, on competition, and on security of supply. That's the way to do it, not by destroying the industry and creating a PowerPoint type of energy policy. Therefore, I think that we are seeing in France, in Germany, in Italy, a big change in politicians. Politicians are starting to talk about the mistakes made, are starting to talk about the importance of guaranteeing supply instead of fixating policy on a very ideological and radical view of climate that has absolutely nothing to do with protecting the environment. And this is the key factor, is that after hundreds of billions of subsidies, what we are seeing in Germany is that the Germans are talking about adding more coal to the energy mix, that after hundreds of billions of subsidies, we are seeing that everybody is saying, oh, we made a mistake by shutting down nuclear. The problem is that politicians should not dictate energy policy based on radical ideologies. And unfortunately, in the European Union, activists dictated energy policy, and now that has led to destruction of jobs, destruction of industry, and stagnation.
You know, Daniel, when it comes to green energy, I always like to point to this example that China is a significant producer of whether we're talking about windmills or solar panels, but it continues to use coal. Okay, Daniel, Good to speak with you. Yeah. Good to speak with you today, and have a great week.
Same to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
An oil tanker from Russia has